Dance with Dragons and Feast for Crows all in one season. How does it come together? Let's find out. I just saw the premiere of Game of Thrones Season 1. This is The Wars That Come, and honestly, I mean, normally when I do vlogs, I just summarize what happens, but there's so much that happens, I'm just gonna talk about it. But anyway, when Game of Thrones episodes usually start, usually there's a bit of build-up establishing here's where everyone's at, but usually I feel like when they're doing it, they're not that interesting, because this episode, it was good, I liked it, but I don't know, it just felt really small. I didn't feel like anything happened. I mean, I feel like usually when they're checking in, I feel like something big happens. Here, I don't feel like anything. It just felt like a check-in episode with everyone. Like, okay, here's this person, you remember them, okay, here's what's happened to them, not much. And yeah, and when you consider just how amazing the season 4 finale was to Game of Thrones, where it's like this big, holy shit, oh my gosh, what's happened, to just sort of see everyone in this sort of place was kind of a bummer. And I don't blame the show for that. I mean, it's like that in the books too. A lot of the two books, there's a lot of plot lines that in Feast for Crows, you're just sitting through a lot of plot lines, and you're like, where's Arya, where's Tyrion, and yeah, Tyrion's not in Feast for Crows, and Dance of Dragons, there's also a lot of check-in, here's where everyone's at, but, the stuff in the West is, kind of interesting. But yeah, it's probably the fact that they're working with probably the least interesting source material. The best stuff, we already have seen, all the best stuff in Game of Thrones, so they're kind of just sort of stuck with the lesser books, and also the other books, which we don't know about yet. Yeah. It was, and I'm not going to compare it to the books so much. I'm going to compare it to the books, but I won't spoil it just because I don't see any real need to. I'll compare at times, but honestly, I feel like the show is one of those things where it has taken so many liberties with the books in terms of how certain things happen and what to focus on and who's getting spotlight, that honestly it exists as its own entity. Kind of like Walking Dead, except I feel like Game of Thrones is a little bit more bound to it, whereas Walking Dead, I feel like they get a bit more freedom. Actually, the more I think about it, they're very similar in how loose they play with the source material at times. Although the only difference is Game of Thrones started out really close to the source material, and then just gradually diverged. Whereas Walking Dead, the divergence happened a lot faster. But anyway, let's get into talking about it. So, first off, I found it really interesting that how focused on stuff from Dance of Dragons they are. And again, I think part of that has to do with the fact that they're cutting out a lot of... Feast for Crows focuses on a lot of characters that aren't the ones we're normally used to, and a lot of them are getting cut, and a lot of the big stuff is in Dance of Dragons. But at the same time, it's it just felt really thin, and I think part of that was probably because Arya was in the episode, and which I kind of figured when I saw the credits. Yeah, just warning you, this review is probably going to be rambling. When I saw the opening credits and Maisie Williams' name wasn't there, also I saw the episode titled, so I'm like, okay, House of Black and White. I'm guessing Arya is going to show up there. It wouldn't surprise me. Especially considering Game of Thrones has done that in the past season 2, and I'm pretty sure season 3, we don't see Arya in the first episode, or we barely see her. But yeah, there's not a lot of Feast for Crows content. There's a Greyjoy plotline, this plotline involving this guy from Dorne, and we've already passed most of Brienne's Feast for Crows run, so it's understandable that we're getting a lot of Dance of Dragons. Anyway, let's get into the episode. So, in the books, we open at the Greyjoy Islands and stuff, but since this show is not doing the Greyjoys, and we're taking material from both books that are happening simultaneously, it does sort of beg the question, where do you start? And I thought it was really interesting to open with the flashback of Cersei. It's kind of a cliche way to open a season, but again, it's from the books, and it is very interesting. And in the behind-the-scenes they did, I thought they did a very good job justifying why they did it. You're sort of establishing where Cersei's at. And that she feels the threat of Marjorie Tyrell. One reoccurring theme we're going to see with Cersei this season is just her sense of insecurity, her lack of trust, and paranoia. Cersei's always crazy, but just setting up the idea that she really doesn't like Marguerite Terrell and she sees there's a real threat and that'll take anything away. I thought that was a really good thing. Again, it just sets her tone nicely, sets her character. Again, it's a good change, and they cut out a little. There was a little bit more to the prophecy in the book that they cut out, but again, I'm glad. But at the same time, they wanted the takeaway to be the threat of Marguerite Terrell, and I thought that was Marguerite Terrell, and I thought that was really good. And yeah. And sorry, I'm blanking out. And it was also nice to just see her prophecy get recognized, because Daenerys has a prophecy in the books, but it doesn't come to light in the show. So it's nice to see that. And yeah. All right, and the rest of King's Landing, and it's gonna be like this in the books. It's basically just a lot of we're walking around and we're kind of bummed about the death, and it's just a lot of aftermath and post Tywin's death stuff, and just a lot of Cersei being crazy. Which I'm not saying that's bad, it's good, and the show conveys it really nicely. Like, there's a scene where Cersei's like at the morning party and she's alone, and it's like in this darkly lit room. But yeah, I mean, like, it's not just like here's the setup and here we're gonna go, and it's like no, like most of the season is just gonna be a little quiet, and there's no real fun power play anymore. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with the fact that Tyrion's not at King's Landing anymore. But even then, yeah, it's like I feel like both stories are kind of suffering, because Tyrion's really good when he's messing around in power stuff, but there's no power stuff going on in King's Landing, and Tyrion is no longer in King's Landing, and his story was... I think this is the first time when I felt like Tyrion's story was kind of dull. Like, I mean, Jeremy Johns, in his season 4 review, he was kind of concerned that, Tyrion's story wasn't going to be as interesting on Left King's Landing, and it's a good story. Like, I've read the books, and it's good, but it's good when he's being Tyrion, he's playing around with people, interacting with stuff, and, as we progress further and further, it gets more into the fun, messing around Tyrion. I mean, at least in the books, I don't know. From what I've heard, they're going to change his story around big time, but here, again, this was just another, like, that was my, again, I'm going to probably say this a lot, but my overarching problem was that this was just a episode where I don't feel like anything happened. It was just a check-in saying, here's where this character's at, and here's where this character's at. So, yeah, I mean, Tyrion, it was just establishing Tyrion's across the Narrow Sea, and he's probably going to head over to where Daenerys is and help her out, since she's a much better leader and Tyrion's good at advising. And I'm good, but I wish they had been a bit smarter about it. Remember in the books it was a bit tighter, whereas here, Varys gives, like, some sort of very cliche, get off your butt and do something speech, which, honestly, I think is kind of amusing, since that's basically what the fans gonna want. But it just seems weird hearing Varys sort of give Tyrion this uplifting speech, because Varys is this very mysterious, power-playing, mysterious person, and yeah, it just seemed kind of weird just seeing him be very pro-Daenerys. And in the books, and I'm trying to figure out if they're still going with the direction they went with Varys in the books, because in the books, Varys isn't with Tyrion at this point. And so I'm wondering if there's this thing we learn about Varys later on. I wonder, are they still going with that, or are they going into some completely different direction? Or is he just going to send him off on his way? Like, I don't know. But yeah, hopefully once Tyrion's story gets moving, it'll get interesting. Daenerys' story was, again, pretty slow, establishing where everyone's at. It's establishing that there's tension in the city. Basically more of what we saw in Season 4. Daenerys is trying to rule, and she's finding it really difficult, and the people harder to control. We have a nude scene that was in the book that there's a million ways that Unsullied could have gotten killed, but we just had to throw in a nude scene. And speaking of nude scenes, we also got to see Emilia Clarke in bed with Daario, who's advising her to control her dragons, and we see her dragons, and they're huge. And yeah, so that's going to be a thing of how to control the dragons. And that's ultimately a question I also have reading the books is how does she control the dragons? Like there's this is kind of why I like Daenerys' story is that it's about her saying how can she control stuff? How can she control stuff? She not only is she struggling to control her people, but she's also struggling to control her children, her dragons. And this kind of raises the question of even if Daenerys were to fly over to Westeros and conquer it, would she still be able to rule? Because she's struggling to rule this city as it is, but then you make the argument that Westeros, she's like the proper person to rule. Here, she sort of forcibly came and took over, so there's people who disagree. So, if she was in a place where she's supposed to be on the throne, would it go over better, or is this like something she's going to encounter regardless? Again, it's an interesting thing. It's just a little slow. It was interesting though to see Emilia Clarke nude again, because like I remember hearing that she didn't like doing the nude scenes, and she wasn't that nude in it, but even so, like it's just interesting seeing her do those scenes again. And Dario's playing a bit more of an active. I like how they are establishing the romance between those two. Like in the books, it's a lot more of Daenerys just having fantasies about her. It's like, oh Dario, oh Dario. But here it's like they're in a relationship, which having read the books, I think that's a good change. I mean, it's a way of establishing their relationship and feelings with each other, without it being like the will they, won't they side plot from between the Unsullied and Interpreter, which I do not care about more than the book. And it's also a nice way because there's a character from Dorne who kind of links up into Daenerys' story, and from what I hear that he's not going to be in it, so I'm kind of wondering, well, he kind of does something significant in Daenerys' story, so who are they going to give it to? And I have a feeling they're going to give it to Dario. And we'll have to see where it gets. Nothing happens in Brienne's story. It's just to check in here. Hey, here's Brienne. Here's where she's at. I really wonder where they're going to go with her story, because having read the books, they pretty much covered most of. They kind of skipped through most of Brienne's story, so I wonder, are we going to go back and do some of that stuff now? Are we going to show some of her story in Winds of Winter? Or is Brienne just going to walk around Westeros until Winds of Winter for the season, then next season she'll do something? I hope not, because I really like Brienne, but I'm really interested to see where the show goes for her. From the looks of Next Up, it seems like Brienne's story is going to something's going to happen. I'm hoping it's Lady Stoneheart, although it would just feel really weird throwing her in the middle of the season. It would have been much better suited if you had just ended Season 4 of the reveal of Lady Stoneheart, but we'll see. And there's another amusing near miss where two characters from the books cross each other. I love how Brienne has basically found both Stark girls, but hasn't done much. Like, I mean, if anything, all this is doing is just confirming that Brienne's quest is just over, which wasn't much of a quest in the show. Yeah. And Sansa's leaving the Vale, which it's interesting, and I do like how Sansa's become a way more interesting character now that she's out of King's Landing, and she's no longer brooding, but she's actually, sort of playing around, and although I really wonder where they're going with that, because they stay in the Vale quite a while in the book, and Feast for Crows, there's like a few chapters, and I mean, are they just going to go somewhere and visit someone quickly, or are we going into something from Winds of Winter? Like, I really get the sense they're doing that, since, like, there's not that much of Sansa's story in Winds of Winter, but at the same, not Winds of Winter, Feast for Crows. So I had a feeling that we were doing it, but from the looks of it, I very much get the sense that we're going to be getting a bit of Sansa's Winds of Winter very early. And then we go to the Wall, which, again, it's just another, here's where everyone's at. I'm not saying it was bad, it's good. I mean, the whole bit of the Wall is a bunch of little interesting power dynamics, but again, like, this is, like, going to be the first of many times where not much is going to happen at the Wall. I mean, it's going to be a bit more understandable in the show than in this season than last season, simply because Season 4, they were kind of stretching something out. Here, it's pretty much the book. And it's good in that it's establishing the tension that's building at the Wall. There's the tension between the humans and the wildlings, between Jon Snow and Mance, and I really liked when he Like, Jon Snow's kind of sort of trying to juggle all these different factions, and Jon Snow shooting the arrow, I don't remember if that was in the books or not, but if not, it was a really well done way of just really establishing the tension and really building a sense of, yeah, Jon Snow's gonna have a tough time managing the wall. It's interesting that Davos is there, though, because in the books, Davos isn't at the wall, he's doing something else, so I'm curious if they're dropping that storyline or not. They probably are for time, and because it didn't really go anywhere in the books as of yet. But yeah. It was a good episode overall. I didn't hate it. It's just, like, not much happened. I mean, when you... Even on its own, when you... Not comparing it to the books, when you consider just how much happened in the last season and stuff to get to this, and not much happens, it's kind of underwhelming. Again, like, it's the first episode, they're establishing everyone's at, and as far as table setting goes, it does its job, but at the same time, it's sort of like, you do sort of want something. I mean, hopefully it'll pick up. I mean, we're getting Arya's story next week, so that should be exciting. But yeah. And, I forget I was going to say something else. But yeah, again, I don't hate this episode, but it just sort of brings me back to the frustration of reading the books and sort of turning the pages thinking, okay, we're going to go somewhere, and we're like, that's it. Again, it's not... I don't hate Feast for Crows and Dance of Dragons, but it's not as interesting as everyone else. Like, when you consider how amazing Storm of Swords was, and it's like, yeah, this is nowhere even close. And it's the same thing in the show. It's like, the stuff that we saw last season is nowhere near as good. I mean, there's gonna be no Purple Wedding second episode, I can tell you that. But, yeah. It's like, but again, it's a good episode, and the show has constantly diverged from the book, so it'll be interesting to see how they sort of manage this season. Again, this is kind of like one of the slowest setup-y starts since the first season, but again, we'll see where they go. So, leave your thoughts below in the comments. Like, dislike, subscribe, and this is G-Star60, and I'll see you guys next week. And I'm going to try not to make this just one giant laundry list of differences from the book. I'm going to have to get into that, but I'm going to have to get out of the habit of that. So until next time, take care.